joining us. We are recording, and it would be great if you would just go into the chat and tell us where you're signing in from. And we'll wait for all of our attendees to get in the door. And I will say where I am. And how cold it is here, because we can't believe it. Oops, I only sent it to the panelists, not everyone. Okay, Louisville, Texas. I don't know that place. Very windy habitat in Michigan. Oh, legal aid. I love when we have legal aid folks here. That's really great. Johnny, is Louisville in the sort of Dallas-Fort Worth giant area? Definitely got the St. Louis and Las Vegas contingents. Okay, right outside of DFW in Denton County. Okay. Hey, Jose. It's nice to see you. Dawn, I cannot believe it's that windy. That's dangerous. Okay. Federal Reserve in Cleveland. Hi, Andrew. Nice to have you here. All right, Kathy, you got the Las Vegas contingent out. Fairview Park, okay. Baltimore, hi, Maria. Let's see, timekeeper. Philly, 57, you're warmer than Tucson, Arizona. How does that make you feel? No, we complain, but we also, it's really fun. It's almost like having a snow day when, you know, I did live back east for most of my life. So hey, David, how cold is it? That's what we're saying. What's the temperature there? I'm trying to develop sympathy because it's only 50 in Tucson. 52, okay, that's about the same. That's nippy. 61 in Baltimore. Everything's upside down and backwards. Okay, do we still have people signing in? But it seems like we've kind of leveled off. Raquel, hey. Oh, 81 in Tampa. No cold days there. Yeah, we can commiserate when it's summer and it's 115 here. And okay, I think we should go ahead and get started, and we'll let some other people straggle in as they can. So I'm Marcia Nedland. I'm going to be the moderator today, and we're doing something a little different for us. We're having some of our practitioner leaders reflect back on what 2021 was like and what conclusions they've reached from it and what it's led them to plan for 2022. It's been still quite a tumultuous time, I think, for most of us trying to figure out what to do. So I'll just do a few opening slides and then we'll turn it over to them. So if you don't know, the Middle Neighborhoods Initiative is a national initiative focused on mobilizing attention to reverse the disappearance of middle neighborhoods, which happens most often through decline and sometimes through gentrification. So the things that we do in the initiative is that we have a community of practice, and that is who is sponsoring this webinar. And we have about 800 people signed up as members of the community of practice, and we probably have another 1,000 or so who are on our general mailing list. And our goal is just to facilitate peer-to-peer learning among all the practitioners. So we do that through this webinar series, newsletters, case studies, events. Sometimes they're more virtual than not nowadays, site visits that are more virtual than not. Also, the initiative has a research component, policy analysis and advocacy around housing, lending, and other issues that are related to this, and communication strategies to just try to advance awareness and technical knowledge throughout all of our audiences. So the whole initiative is a joint venture between the National Community Stabilization Trust and NeighborWorks America, and is advised by a steering committee of 20 people who are a mix of researchers, practitioners, and policymakers. And okay, so I usually start out, just in case anyone doesn't know what we're talking about when we say middle neighborhoods. Middle neighborhoods are mostly single family housing, although my photograph is from Baltimore, I think, or maybe it's Philly, where that's not always the case, the single family thing. And they were often built for families with children in their time, which is one of the reasons that they're sort of faltering, in their ability to find their new constituency, because that's a declining demographic in this country. They tend to still be well more than 50% owner occupied, but if you look at the long-term trends, that's eroding. The housing stock is aging, but it's usually in not bad condition. And its biggest problem is that it lacks some of the features and updates that homebuyers are looking for today, like that second bathroom. Property values, we can no longer say anything about with conviction, because it's all been tossed in the air since the pandemic. Before the pandemic, it was in most of our middle neighborhoods were, they either were in sort of slow decline, or they were just flat, or they were maybe increasing in value slightly, but they were still underperforming against the city or against inflation, which was another strike against them. Now, we'll be talking a lot about that today. And then lastly, I find this always very interesting about middle neighborhoods. They tend to be more racially and ethnically diverse than either their low income or higher income counterparts. And they tend to be more economically diverse too. Our research person, Alan Malik, has been finding than either their lower or higher income neighborhoods. And one of the reasons we care so much about them is that it's the place where there's a lot of hard-won middle household wealth in terms of the value of the home. So why we're concerned about them is just that we have seen across the country that many of them are faltering in their sustainability. We used to let them go sort of on autopilot, but that doesn't seem to be working so well anymore. So the things that they're vulnerable to are, not being able to conjure up a new owner occupant buyer when a house goes on the market, and instead getting perhaps not even a good investor, but an irresponsible investor. They're having trouble generating the home values that would actually allow people to do the maintenance, repairs, and updates that would make that house appealing to a next generation of home buyers without having an appraisal gap. And then as residents leave and properties become rental properties, then in most cases, there's less of a reliable set of neighborhood leaders to take stewardship of the neighborhood. And then this whole thing about home equity, this is where people are developing their household wealth, their intergenerational wealth, and it also, municipal governments rely heavily on these neighborhoods to deliver tax revenue to help keep everything else going in the city. Okay, so today, by the way, we usually offer a Middle Neighborhoods 101 webinar every month or two. So if you ever want to have somebody to get a little more detail on what middle neighborhoods are, you can attend one of those. Also, we're very happy to deliver one just for you and your particular local audience if you want us to do that. I want to draw your attention to a tool we have on our website, which is a mapping tool that our own David Sanchez, who's walking his dog but on this call, worked to develop. And it's just a great way for you to sort of play around and see where your middle neighborhoods in your MSA may be. You can choose on the left side a number of different screens in terms of income ranges to see, how it would change if you were looking at 60 to 100% of median income versus, 80 to 120, whether you were looking at the city level or against regional AMIs and that sort of thing. It can be a great place to kick off a conversation about your middles. So the fun part, our guests today, really excited, so happy they were able to join us. These three people are real leaders in their fields. They come to us from a variety of different angles of practitioners in middle neighborhoods. Greg Peralka is the EVP of lending operations at CHN Housing Capital, which is, he's going to tell us more about. It's an emerging CDFI, I think, but a long-term, it works with CHN Partners. Is that what it is, Greg?
Housing Partners, yeah.
Housing Partners, yeah, they changed their name recently, which is a very long-standing nonprofit in Cleveland and does really innovative and interesting things. And Greg's going to talk today about some of the most innovative lending strategies in the country, I think. Lisa Potts is a board member at Cornerstone, a nonprofit in St. Louis, Missouri. Oops, we misspelled St. Louis. A little transposition there. Neither Ann or I caught that. Sorry, Lisa. Lisa is really well versed. She has a whole other day job, but she's really well versed in what goes on in the neighborhood that Cornerstone works in, and doing some really innovative strategies about making sure their most vulnerable households have a place and continue to have a place in the neighborhood even as it improves. And then Kathy Thomas Gibson is the Director of Community Services for the City of Las Vegas, Nevada, which, okay, how many of you knew that the state of Nevada was on Pacific time? That was real news to me. There's a little point of trivia for you. You can challenge your colleagues about that. So community services, Kathy's really taking some interesting leadership there, I think, and I think pulling together some silos at city government that maybe weren't so interactive before, and really trying to take a look at neighborhood geographies instead of program service columns. So those are our speakers today, and we're going to take a different format than usual as well, which is that we're just going to have a discussion. I have a bunch of questions that I'm going to ask people to talk about. So we'll do that for most of our time, and then we'll save probably about 25 minutes at the end for Q&A, if all goes well. But do feel free, please, to type any questions you have into the chat, and we'll either answer them along the way, or I'll go back to them at the end of the panel discussion, and we'll talk about them then. Okay, so here we go. Thanks everybody for joining. My first question, I think I'll just have each of you introduce yourselves and tell us what lines of business your department or nonprofit currently offer. So Greg, why don't you're first up in my lineup, so why don't you go first?
Great, thanks Marcia, thanks Ann and the Middle Neighborhoods Group for allowing us to speak today. So I am currently the EVP of our lending team, and as Marcia had mentioned, CHN Housing Partners, we've been around for 40 years. We just celebrated our 40th anniversary this year. In 2019, we formed our Housing Capital team, and it's our residential lending arm for our parent company. And so we concentrate on different lending products. They can be first mortgages, they could be down payment assistance, we do home repair, but we're really trying to fill the gap of small dollar loans within the Cleveland market and Cuyahoga County and Lorain County in particular. And so our mission has always been to try to fill that gap, allow people to have the dream of home ownership. And we do that by helping individuals with capital in communities of color, as well as to low income households and people with imperfect credit. And we take a look at the whole profile for the families that we're working with. We served over 50,000 people last year, our partners team. And so we've always been in the market as a housing developer and providing housing services. And then just a couple years back, we went ahead with the capital team. And as Marcia said, we're doing a lot of great innovative products, which we'll talk about later on.
Great. Kathy?
Good morning. It's still morning here. So good morning, everyone. So excited to participate. So I'm the director for the Office of Community Services, which is kind of the kitchen sink department. If they don't know where to stick it in the city, we do it. And so we're responsible for addressing and creating the plan, evaluating the plan to address homelessness for the entire city. We're also the department that manages the affordable housing programming and other federal grants like Community Development Block Grants and HOPWA. We are the department that is responsible for the city's diversity, equity, and inclusion work. But what brought us here to this table is our work in neighborhood revitalization and community engagement. And so if it's happening on the blocks in the city of Las Vegas, this team is involved. Everything from working with our neighborhood associations and homeowners associations to matching grants, beautification, public art, housing preservation actually is in this bucket, as well as other kinds of programming where we work with, for example, HUD's neighborhood revitalization strategy areas. The neighborhood we're talking about today falls into that category, where there's a lot of data heavy decision making happening. And so we have a team of folks working in that space as well, both as policy analysts and system change agents.
Ooh, I like that, system change agents. That should be the new title for a lot of folks who are in neighborhood change mode. I like that a lot. Okay, Lisa.
Good morning. It is still morning here in St. Louis as well. I'm happy to be here. My name is Lisa Potts. As I was recently introduced, I am a resident of the West End neighborhood in the city of St. Louis. And I am here today representing a board that I serve on called Cornerstone. We are a Christian Community Development Corporation emerging to be. The West End is truly that middle neighborhood that you spoke of. We're about 90% African American. And I just want you to know that the median income for the West End is $34,000 with a net worth of about $13,000, whereas our neighboring city, a city that's right next door to us, has a median income of $63,000, which is almost double. And check this out, their net worth is $109,000. So you're talking about $13,000 versus $109,000, and we are literally the next city over. And so that is the struggle that we faced. Cornerstone in particular focuses on providing supportive, affordable housing to residents. We have a 10-year action plan, and by 2030, our goal is to provide affordable housing opportunities for 50 families. And then going outward into the broader community, we want to impact 1,500 West End residents through economic empowerment activities.
Outstanding. That's really great. Yeah, I'm so glad you shared those numbers, because that's the classic ratio that you see over and over again between Black households. I assume that other neighborhood with the higher
Yes, ma'am.
Household wealth is more white. Yeah. So closing the racial wealth gap is just huge. And it's really, I think, one of the big differences that we're noticing between Black middle neighborhoods and other middle neighborhoods. You'll maybe hear throughout this hour that the National Middle Neighborhoods Initiative is really focusing a lot of our research and learning on what are the differences between Black middles and other middles, and how we need to change the sort of theory of change to have the right impact there. Absolutely. And Lisa's been helping us with that a lot. Okay, so now let's go back and have each of you think about 2021. What happened in your middle neighborhoods in 2021, and how are you, if you reflect on it, how do you summarize it? So I guess Kathy, let's start with you this time.
Awesome. Is this where I get to share my slides? Where
sure.
You guys?
Yeah.
Good.
She's going to show us what some of her neighborhood looks like.
Yes, let's look at that. I'm going to share my screen, and I hope I'm going to share my screen and have an opportunity to really quickly run through what's happening on the ground. Can everyone see that?
Uh-huh.
Fantastic. So really just want to hit the highlights because it's hard to have context for Vegas. This middle neighborhood, as you see that big orange line, that's a freeway, that's I-95.
Mm-hmm.
And you may see in the green shaded area, a couple of big retail areas, the Meadows Mall, which is a dying mall at this point, and a couple of other spaces. There was once a very thriving commercial and retail district that never bounced back from the 2008 recession. And
in
that has started.
recession, if I
Yeah.
may, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I mean, I did want to point out, I meant to do it earlier, that in Las Vegas is one of those Western cities where you probably lost at least 40% of your housing value in 2008, right?
At least, and actually we were probably number 3 for people who ended up underwater by 2010. We were truly the epicenter. A lot of folks heard about California, but the foreclosure crisis epicenter was actually here in the state of Nevada. So some major thoroughfares, Charleston Boulevard to the south, Alta Drive bisects this neighborhood, and then the freeway to the north. To give you some context of, it's a heavily trafficked, heavily traveled area at its perimeters and down its center. A lot of post-war construction. I took these shots for a couple of reasons. One, this is an intersection in the neighborhood that's really, really wide. The lower picture shows a retail center to the right of my right of the picture, where they've sort of tried to wall it off from the residential community. And of course, the dying mall is also there. This picture is to show that, by the way, this is one of the neighborhoods that still had grass, because it's a lot of post-war construction. Newer construction in Las Vegas is all xeriscaped, but you'll see people are letting the grass go. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a neatly maintained lime green house that's got the trees and the shrubbery and the grass, and then right next to it, a house that looks abandoned. But we know it's not abandoned because they still put the trash out on trash day. The lower left-hand picture, the house is actually boarded up. The house to the right is boarded up, and sitting right next to a house that, you know, not fancy, but neat and clean. And this is sort of endemic of what's happening now in the neighborhood. By the way, these pictures were all taken on the same block. I really wanted to share the data because as we've begun collecting data to inform our decisions in this work, we wanted to look at household types, for example, and something odd jumped out at me that we want to dig more deeply into. We expected to see married couples there, 31%. We expected to see female heads of household as the demographics are shifting, 34%, 29% single male headed households. We don't know what that's about. We want to dig a little bit deeper. Is this widows living alone? What is that number telling us, right? And this is why we always say we're not data driven, we're data informed, because just looking at the data at its surface and basing decisions upon that doesn't tell you enough about what's going on. What we do know is that there's almost a neat split in terms of tenancy, where we have 52% renting, 48% owning. Most of those folks, 88%, have been in the house, the same house, for more than a year. We've got about 3,100, a little over 3,100 individual units in this neighborhood. And we deliberately picked a small neighborhood because we're using the walkable communities approach so that you can walk those blocks and get to those amenities if those amenities still existed. We're looking at the labor force here. And again, because this population is aging, we've got 42% who are not in the labor force. They're not looking for work. They're not the unemployed, unemployment at 11%. Those individuals are still in the labor force looking for work. We've got a considerable amount not looking for work. And this next slide will underscore, I think, what Marcia was saying about the spread in income. This is a really income diverse neighborhood. And I mean, all over the map, from below poverty level to middle income level, where you have a significant proportion of the neighborhood below the poverty line and also some above the poverty line. And so it's an interesting mix and approach to doing this kind of work. What has happened this past year is all of the systems we had in place between 2008 and the onset of COVID don't exist. The neighborhood associations that were highly engaged, I had a staff person tell me, oh, the neighborhood associations, yeah, that died away. And I was like, well, let's reinvigorate them. They were like, no, the neighborhood leaders died. They were elderly, they've passed away. We're having to start from scratch. We've had a significant demographic shift from single families, primarily Anglo households, to now a majority of households who do not speak English as their first language. About a third of those are Spanish-speaking households, but there are many other languages in the community that we have to connect with in a meaningful way and understand all those cultural elements that attend with language differences. What's happened in 21? I mean, the easy answer is always COVID. What we found is that there were a number of opportunities presented to us as a municipality, which required us to work more closely with code enforcement and planning, with business licensing, with government affairs. We all the sort of "this is not my job" conversations ended because, unlike recessions, and Las Vegas is typically very resilient coming out of a recession. But what we've noticed, both from the 2008 recession and from this pandemic era recession, is that we are creating the tale of two cities, that everyone is not bouncing back at the same rate or at the same level. And so it represents an opportunity for us to think differently about how we invest resources, and not just invest resources because a lot of federal dollars have shown up all of a sudden. This pandemic highlighted long-standing disparities that was easy to overlook because there was so much surrounding prosperity. And it has made us think a little bit differently, still maintaining our asset-based community development focus, because that's our theory of change, but recognizing that everyone is not experiencing resiliency the same way, and that the pandemic not only put a spotlight on those disparities, but it deepened and widened them in ways that we were not necessarily prepared to address as a municipality. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Kathy. Boy, that last statement you made is such a great summary of what so many people have seen everywhere. But in middle neighborhoods, I think COVID really illuminated that diversity of income, resources, and stability, and just how much of a safety net each household had behind it, and those who didn't have much, you could tell. Lisa, you're nodding your head. You want to talk about how it worked out in the West End last year?
Yeah, man, Kathy just brought up so many things that were relevant. The whole piece around the pandemic shedding the spotlight, it caused people to work differently, and it really inspired and spurred, more cooperation, more collaboration than you had ever seen before. We started doing things globally by, bringing our clergy together in partnership with our health leaders so that we can get, our most vulnerable communities connected to the health resources. When this pandemic first hit, we didn't have testing, in the cities where they needed to be, in the inner cities. And so it became this new leaders emerged without even having to have like this official, let's have a leadership class. People stepped up out of frustration, out of tired of being left behind, and people stood up and started trying to make change. We did something really intentional in the West End. We were in the middle, or still are in the middle of doing a community development, plan, a comprehensive planning process. And it was a plan where, Cornerstone originally wrote the grant, and, I was one of the residents that helped write the grant, and we received those funds from a partner called Invest STL. And so it was always a partnership, but at some point there was a real shift in who was actually leading the process. We asked the question, how much of this process would you like to lead? Do you want to lead, or is it really a part? And the residents stepped up and said, yes, we want to lead. And so as an institution, we stepped back. And so people don't often share their power. People don't often give it away. And that's what we did as Cornerstone. We gave the power away. We stepped back in this shared leadership role. But what also we recognized is that as a result of that, we needed a relationship broker. We needed someone to help us manage that dynamic of what does it mean now that we're in a process that is that's resident led, because you still have to do some level of capacity building. You have to do more building relationships. It's no longer just transactional. We're trying to move toward the transformative, and you can't do that without trust. And so trust takes time, and cooperation cooperation happens at the speed of trust. So if you don't have trust, you are not going to go very far, very fast.
That is amazing. I'm typing that into the chat because cooperation goes at the speed of trust.
Happens at the speed of trust. Yes, ma'am.
Happens. That's right. I need to get that stitched on a pillow. It's such a good point, but I'm fascinated that you found a whole different set of leaders that were emerging because of COVID and stepping up to address that challenge.
Absolutely. Really people needed to know where to go get tested, where to go get vaccinations. We had a grassroots organization that emerged out of this pandemic called Prepare STL, and they literally created, comprehensive signage, and they knocked on doors in our most vulnerable communities. So I was a part of that ground group where we went to the gas stations and the liquor stores and the convenience marts and the laundry marts, those places where we knew our people were, and started trying to educate them about the pandemic and wearing your mask and staying 6 feet apart and those things. That happened at the grassroots level. Sadly to say, that was not a top down, that was a bottom up.
Wow, that's just so interesting. So now we're going to move a little out of a little bit up into the air of lending, which also has to happen. I doubt if Greg has been out on the street organizing folks, but I think he's been really developing some interesting stuff to address issues that have gone on in Cleveland. So tell us about that. What did 2021 do to the housing market in Cleveland and the lending capability?
Absolutely. I'll share real quick just to show the group what our middle neighborhood looks like here in Cleveland. Some bungalows, some cute bungalows, right?
Yeah.
Each other. And I was born in Staten Island, New York. So houses were even tighter than this. You could open up a window and talk to your neighbor, right? So
sure.
And if I just share as well in this slide presentation to show the group a little bit around our neighborhood. Here's the Cleveland wards, if you will. And so the neighborhoods that we're talking about. And then we do have some community development groups and communities services right here. So it maps out nicely with the map I just shared, right? I mean, so those groups are right within these
classic northeastern kind of.
Correct.
First, they call them wards instead of council districts. That's what I noticed when I moved from the Midwest to the Northeast.
And then again, just some of our census tracts that we're talking about that we're looking at within our neighborhoods right now. And so, as we talk through what 2021 looked like. What's interesting is that Forbes magazine back in 2020, at the end of 2020, started talking about the top 5 housing markets to watch, and actually Cleveland was number 5 within that group. And who would have thought, right? And a lot of that has come to fruition, and it's because in a time of remote working, more feasible than ever to be flexible where you're at, right? The affordability of Cleveland's housing market was certainly appealing, and appealing to many investors that would come in, and then also just people that wanted to work remotely from home. And so we've seen a lot of creative things happening within this market. So if a home, for instance, had a formal dining room, maybe it's no longer actually a dining room. They were using it to homeschool their children within that dining room space, right? So that's how they would list it. And so, as we all know, the market has been so tight in regards to supply, right? And so homes are really, coming off the shelf so quickly in a matter, usually before it's even listed, we're seeing within Cleveland, right? On average, they're going off of the shelf in about 2 weeks. And so what we really concentrated on in 2021 as an organization was to help fill the gap of small dollar loans. And so we know that many banks, and I come from a banking background, 30 years within mortgage lending, and many banks would say, oh, we do small dollar loans, but we know that their CRA products a lot of times don't resonate with our communities. And
When
so
you say small dollar, what size are you talking about?
we're talking about 75,000 and lower, Marcia. So, we're doing loans in the $20,000 range, for instance, with our product, and it's called the Believe Mortgage. We rolled it out in a correspondent agreement this past April, and we've probably touched about 80 different families since April, with this product. And that's with pre-qualifications, that's putting people in homes. And so, what we wanted to do was, again, providing capital for small dollar loans in these communities of color and really bridging that gap. And so it's really putting your money where your mouth is, right? Because everyone keeps on saying we're going to do small dollar loans, and then the banks don't want to do them because they're not profitable, right? Or they fail the qualified mortgage regulation, so they fail QM. And so we don't have those issues to be able to help our customers. And so we have done that through down payment assistance. We've done it through the first mortgage I just spoke about. We've also done it through home repair. And so our home repair is a $20,000 loan, a second loan. And if it's a homestead exemption, you're actually, it's free and clear, no repayment if you live in the house for 5 years for $20,000. And so we advertised that, and we were able to help 84 families with that particular loan. We were oversubscribed within 2 months, as you can imagine, right? And so just to have that program, so we're looking at additional funding within our marketplace. But again, it's really going into those neighborhoods and helping them. And I love what Lisa and Kathy have said. It's, it is building trust. They understand us as an organization of 40 years that we've been in this marketplace, and we're trying to do the right thing. And so, these products are definitely resonating, with our communities. And so we're working with the city of Cleveland. We're working with Cuyahoga County. And so we're managing these down payment assistance funds and these home repair funds. And then we're able to, easily give those funds over, to the community. Whereas, we don't have any red tape, right? So if you're working with the large banks, and it might take a long time for the process, or you might just be declined because you just don't qualify. Mm-hmm. We have more flexible underwriting guidelines. So, we're looking at, going down as low as 570 in credit score. We're doing higher debt to income ratios. We're doing 3% down with no mortgage insurance. So again, just things that help the borrower to be able to attain their goal of home ownership. So 2021 was really laying that foundation. And then now, as we've earned that trust, we have other banks that want to partner with us and want to go into correspondent agreements and to be able to share these type of CRA programs with Cuyahoga County and all of surrounding greater Cleveland, if you will.
And on your rehab product, what's your loan to value requirement, or do you have one?
There's no loan to value requirement with the home repair. Yeah, so we're going to be looking at 2022, Marcia, we're going to be looking at more acquisition rehab loans. And so again, because the market is so tight, right, with our supply, we had found that we maybe had around let's call it 4,600 homes that were on the market.
Mhm.
Just 2 years ago, that was double that amount, right? And so when you start looking at the communities that are really for affordable housing, that even shrinks more. So that's why these acquisition rehabs are going to be important, in 2022 and beyond. So we can go into these middle neighborhoods, right, and be able to rehab some of these properties, because as you even said in your opening slides, that we have an aging market, right? This is an aging housing market. So we need to update these homes and to be able to do that creatively with a product, and we'll be able to go up to 125% on combined loan to value for those AC rehab loans.
Perfect. Wow, there's so many things that you've hit on that are, to me, so critical and have been throughout my whole career. I mean, this idea of the small dollar loan. So despite the fact that you said that Cleveland was one of the top 5 markets to watch, Cleveland's housing values are still very, very low, right?
Correct. They've probably increased maybe 15% year over year, but yeah. So
But they started out pretty
yeah,
low because
yeah. And I think it's because of the whole idea of manufacturing leaving, right? The Rust Belt, if you will.
yes, it's a classic Rust Belt
yeah,
city.
right, all those classic things about industry, right, with the steel mills and so forth. And but because of the affordability, that's why people are still interested in this market. And
Yes,
and I guess that's a double-edged sword, right? Because then
it
you're
is.
bringing in investors that are just buying up the market, and then there aren't any affordable homes, right, for the people that need it. And so that's
Yeah, and
again,
that's what we need is this intervention in that cycle of, as values decline, they become more affordable, but they're also more attractive to bottom feeding investors, and they'll just grab them right out of the market before our home buyers have a chance to. And they may not be in the kind of move-in ready shape for a first-time buyer in the first place. So that's why I love that you're going to get into AC rehab in a big way. That's really important. And I've worked in a lot of markets where there was a lot of housing stock that was in the $50,000 to $75,000 range, but there's no lenders who would do a mortgage for $50,000 or $75,000. And also, it is the case that most households for whom a $50,000 house is the top of their affordability, probably they have some funky underwriting issues, right? They're probably not going to sail through just, a standard mortgage process. So I think you've really covered a lot of important bases there. And I'm just so excited to see how it rolls out with these small dollar loans. Now, I have to ask where you got your capital from for each kind of loan.
Sure. So we, again, get it from some of it through government funding. So City of Cleveland, some through Cuyahoga County, some through, a private investor or funding, if you will. So we've worked with certain banks. So our corresponding agreement, Marcia, for this past year was with Huntington National Bank. And so, again, one of the, large national lenders. And, when you look at the Cleveland market, they are just really leading by example and really caring about CRA and what that all means within our neighborhoods. And so with these loans, as we are, it's on a non-delegated corresponding agreement, which means we originate the loan in CHN Housing Capital's name. We then allow Huntington to go ahead and underwrite the loan. And then we close the loan in our name, and then we sell it to them pretty quickly through a warehouse line. So they're capturing these loans and they're putting them on portfolio at this point.
Yeah.
And so again, that just shows they care, that they're willing to do that until, they probably are proving out, right, that this borrower is going to pay on time. And so that's what we've seen, with these individuals, because of course they care about, wanting the whole dream of home ownership, and they're going to take responsibility to do it right.
Yeah, usually the default rates are much lower on these kind of loans than they are on just the national average of loans.
That's correct.
And it does, I see Huntington's name pop up on creative lending things throughout my career. They really do want to get in there, and they're willing to portfolio products until they've aged enough that they can sell them to the secondary market or whatever the case is. And so that's just a little tip for everybody here. Look at your sort of community banks. I mean, you said they're a large national bank, but would you still consider them to be a community bank or not?
I'd also say that they're regional in regards to
Okay, regional.
being down in Cincinnati, Columbus area,
Yeah,
you know, here in Ohio. But yeah, they're doing a lot nationally as well. So yeah.
Those community banks have a lot more, generally speaking, they have a greater capacity or willingness to portfolio loans, which just means they have to sit with them for a while and have that capital stuck before wherever they would sell them to believes that they're low risk and will buy them.
Correct. And we service our own loans as well, Marcia.
Okay,
So yes,
good.
if we find that a lender is not interested in that particular loan for whatever reason, we're willing to take on that risk as well. So we've serviced some of the loans. We have a product that's called our Year 16 product. It's a rent fund product. And so we've been doing that for several years where a borrower is renting from us. It's one of our properties that we own in our real estate development. And then in year 13, we start talking to them about home ownership. And we have sales coaches that will prepare them on what home ownership looks like, talk to them about savings, talk to them about their credit. And then if they want to, they can buy the home in year 16 from us, and we service all of those loans. So this year we were able to close on 120 of those loans alone within the Cleveland market. Different developers that we are working with. And so what's really great about that is, you know, we have individuals that have instant equity in these properties. They've been paying.
Because you have been setting aside a portion of their rental payment
Correct.
all of these years, right?
Lease to own type of mentality, right? So they're buying these homes from us for $8,000 up to maybe $20,000, and the property is worth anywhere from 50 to 120, let's call it, right? So, and again, it's excellent that, and we're putting them in a 5-year term. They can go a 3 or 4-year term if they qualify. And so again, they have the instant equity, they've built wealth, and they understand that this is something they can keep in their family for generations.
That's awesome. And so in case anyone didn't instantly recognize this, those homes were all developed originally using low-income housing tax credit, right?
Correct.
And which brought a lot of capital to the table to acquire and rehab them. But then they remain in rental for 15 years. And after that, they can be spun off into, I actually don't know whether you have about how the LIHTC works on properties that you intend to sell at the end of 15 years, whether that's any different than any other LIHTC, but.
Yeah, but sometimes, Marcia, some individuals will buy the properties by cash, and then, you know, some will finance with us. You have others, there's some other creative community banks that are offering a loan as well with low down payment as well as low closing costs.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we're able to provide different venues, different types of instruments for them to be able to finance and to get into the home.
That's great. So Kathy, how are first-time home buyers weathering the investor plague, I'll call it, that's my word, but that's how I feel about it in Las Vegas?
They are not weathering it very well. One thing about the Vegas housing market, it'll bottom out one year, and within months it is hot again because investors can come in and make all cash offers. So our first-time home buyers are not faring very well at all. And housing preservation is an issue. So we're trying to keep people in their homes as well. So in some of our neighborhoods, you know, the "we will buy houses" signs go up everywhere. They are aggressively marketing to seniors. They are pretty predatory in their approaches. And for people who are struggling, sometimes it feels easier to just say, we'll let it go. So we are working on quite a bit of education. February of this year, we launched the Black Home Ownership campaign. because there's also a disparity in home ownership between African Americans and others. And so Mayor Goodman, from the steps of City Hall, said we could fix this. The tools are available to address this. So how do we bring together the resources from the state, the county, and the city, and work with the private sector to ameliorate, if you will, some of those predatory efforts. So part of it is education on the home buyer side to get them ready, whatever that means to people. I have some feelings about assuming that some groups of people are ready and worthy and others are not. But that being said, we do home buyer education, both virtual or remotely and in person. We have a fintech group that's involved with us, helping to not take big chunks. So they have an arm that does real estate, and they won't take big commissions off of these sales, and just every step of the way ensuring that where we can have impact on policy or practice, that we are doing so. And so a lot of it has been bringing in the private sector to talk about the inequity, not equity in terms of I've got value in my home, but social justice equity in home ownership fields. Everything from if I am trying to sell or buy, I'm going to get a different kind of appraisal depending on my race or gender. Well, how do we deal with that? That I'm going to get less favorable terms for insurance, for bank loans, for all of those aspects that still are systemic and systematic in their disparate approaches. And so our homeowners have not fared well. We are lucky that we can use the bully pulpit of the mayor and a couple of our council members to step forward publicly and say, yeah, this is a problem. And here are the first steps we're going to take together as a community to address this over the next 5 or 10 years. So not trying to have a quick fix. We didn't get in this problem and we're not going to get out of it quickly. So to really tackle this from that perspective, so that we're not only educating the home buyers and sellers, but we're also educating the real estate agents. We're educating the appraisers. We are working with partners who package up those loans so that we can have a broader conversation that is not just about, well, you buyer needs to take an 8-hour home buying class to get
That's
you
right,
ready.
because everybody else in the process needs that class too, or a version of it, right?
Exactly.
There's a lot of moving parts to buying a home, and any one of them can completely ruin a household's chances in ways that are also completely unfair. I like that. So Lisa, are you seeing institutional investors in the West End?
Yeah, Kathy, man, she hit on so many important points. And I was like writing down like check, all those things are happening here, you know, in St. Louis. And I'll say that education is key. And we also not only have to educate our potential home buyers, but our current homeowners to make sure that they have the necessary tools and resources so that they can age in place. We are trying to drive home the message that although our neighborhood is desirable and rising and we're doing all these great plans, we're not trying to displace you. We want you to stay here. And when Kathy talked about the people buying the homes, I get an email, a text message, a flyer at least once a week about somebody asking me to buy my home. I mean, it is insane how predatory some of those things are. And when homes do come on the market, they do not last long. So in addition to the competition of somebody offering cash, because who's going to turn that down? What we've started doing as residents is we are proactive. We are also monitoring those home sales as if we're looking, and then we're showing up at those open houses, introducing ourselves to the lenders and to the real estate agents saying, hey, this is in the West End, and these are some of the things that we're trying to do in our community. And we give them a card and say, whomever you end up giving this house to, or whoever puts a contract, they need to know that we are trying to create a community improvement district in this neighborhood. So we are voluntarily raising our taxes so that we can contribute to the economic footprint. We're trying to increase, our security and our safety, and we're trying to improve sidewalks. We are trying to do things on our own because we know the city can't keep up. We can't wait for the city to step up and do what we can do for ourselves. So we are being very proactive in going after some of those things. I am also on a financial empowerment coalition for the past 10 years, where I have worked to get unbanked individuals banked. So I've worked very closely with those financial partners, big and small, on creating loan products that are equitable. And so I'm also on a board of the Gateway Neighborhood Fund, and we have a similar product like Detroit has, that has a fund that's intended to close the appraisal gap. And so you can buy a home with that money, or you can do rehab. And I think that rehab is also for $75,000. But it is a slow moving product because you still have to go about the business of educating people. You can reduce the requirements of the credit score. You can relax the lending. You can do all the underwriting requirements. You can do all those things. But if you do not have an educated borrower, you are setting someone up for failure. So we have to do education all the way around for everybody so that it's sustainable. So when that person gets those keys to that new home, they know what they're doing. Look, they know how to turn on the thermostat. I mean, I'm talking about basic stuff. Because if you don't know, you don't know. But you have to be about the business of educating people and meeting people where they are, and not being judgmental about where they are, but just, this is where you are and it's okay. But let's figure out what you need to do and where you need to go, because some of our people are paying thousands of dollars in rent when they can have a home at that same price. But if you don't know, you don't know. We have a program in St. Louis called Prop NS, and it stands for Neighborhood Stabilization, where the city is taking money and they are stabilizing those vacant properties. So if you would normally go down to our Land Reutilization Authority and buy a house for $1,000, so they still do that, where you can go be on the courthouse steps and bid for the home. That's $1,000, and it's typically falling down, the roof is falling in, but you have vision and you see potential. Well, the city has a program where they're taking some of those homes and they're putting upwards of $30,000 in those homes, and they are stabilizing the roof. They're putting on a new roof. They're putting in floor joists. They're boarding it up, more appropriately. And you can still get that same house for $1,000 if you win the bid. So they don't add the $30,000 that they've just invested on top of it. You can still get that house for $1,000. And now you have a little bit more stability in that home. And it's more appeasing to that bank partner when you can go and say, hey, this home was just stabilized by the city with $30,000. This is what was done. And it gives you that much more equity in the process. But we could talk about this all day. I'm sure this webinar is not long enough for all the points and things that people have talked about today. So you're probably going to have a part two.
Yeah, we probably are. I am amazed that you said you're working to create a community investment district. Is that what you called it? Where you actually voluntarily tax yourselves to create a fund?
Community Improvement District. Yes, ma'am. It's similar to what businesses do when they create a small business district. We're doing it in our neighborhood footprint. So we are actually collecting signatures as we speak, and we have an interactive map that'll show people exactly how much their taxes are going to go up. And because we know our homes are devalued, the taxes are not going to go up that much. So somebody who has a $300,000 house may only pay an additional $600 annually, for that. And then as residents, we get to choose where that money goes. We're prioritizing it. We want, security cameras, and maybe we want to pay, kids to, keep the neighborhoods clean and do some beautification efforts. But no, we are leading that charge.
I love that. I very, very early in my career, I worked with neighborhood nonprofit that successfully did that. And I haven't heard of anybody doing it again until you just said it, except for, I think Baltimore seems to be a place where that's a popular strategy. And I feel like maybe sometimes it extends beyond the business district. I'd have to go back and refresh my memory, but good for you. I think that's a really, and that's not something you can pull off if you don't have trust, right? Because nobody's going to say, yeah, I'll sign your thing to raise my taxes if they don't trust who's going to use the money. I want to touch on one more thing before we turn it over to Q&A, which is how worried are you guys about mortgage foreclosure or evictions? You know, we've been that was a theme of the year, like were the moratoria on evictions going to be cut off or not? And then, the forbearance on mortgages as well. So why don't you go first, Greg? What do you think about Cleveland?
Yeah, it definitely is a concern, as we've looked at, what can we do better, within as an organization. We've definitely tried to help individuals with different policies, if you will, in 2021 and carry that into 2022, meaning that, a person might be running with us and then we have implemented some COVID policies for people that might lose a job, or maybe they go onto partial income. And so again, the whole idea of flexible underwriting guidelines, I call it common sense guidelines, to be honest with you, right? And because of the fact that we've earned trust, we know these borrowers for a number of years, we know that they've paid us on time. I love what Lisa was saying about, individuals don't even realize that they can purchase a home and actually pay less in your mortgage payment than rent, right? I mean, that's what we're seeing with all of our rent to own, if you will, these, our year 16 loans. I mean, people are they don't have payment shock, they're surprised, right? Because of that fact. And so we are, trying to do things creatively, even on the rental side, that, as people are not able to pay their rent, we want to understand the full story, and can we give them assistance? Are we able to do certain things for them during that time? And so we're also in a big project right now, Marcia, where we are in the LeadSafe Fund, the LeadSafe Loan Fund within Cleveland. We manage that. It's a $20 million fund. And so I mention that because our landlords are making their properties lead safe for children, for the people that are living within those properties. And so CHN Housing Capital, we're managing that actual loan fund. So we give grants, and we've probably helped about 55 families this past year in regards to getting their properties lead safe. And then we also offer a loan that has a lower interest rate to these landlords to help them, again, to get the properties in a place where it's more safe for their renters, right? And not so much concentrating on trying to, boot them from the actual property. I mean, let's do what's right for those communities and where they're at. So I think, as we look at, and we touched upon it before, as individuals are being evicted, in that whole thought process, where are they able to go afterwards, right? And so especially, you talk about that tightened housing market, that, it's difficult for them to even find a house, right? What are they going to do? So I think that's why ACT rehab's going to be critical going forward. I mean, you're going to have to take properties that are not in great shape, right? And then be able to rehab them where they're livable, and again, to make them affordable, and making sure that those funds are protected so that investors don't come in and be able to buy up those properties, right? I mean, that's why we want to save those dollars for those that need them. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we've also done, when it comes to home improvements, I didn't mention before, with our Believe mortgage, that first mortgage, we provide a second mortgage simultaneously for anyone that needs health and safety repairs. They can also do that second mortgage, again, to make it safe, to make it livable for them. Maybe it's some type of violation in a housing code or something, right? So they can utilize that $8,000 to rectify the property before they close. And so that's something that we're doing as well, just to, again, to help the person. We service those loans. We understand, what that individual's going through, because we're looking at their total profile. And I know that I saw one of the questions in here about a 590 credit score and so forth. And a lot of that stuff's case by case. I can't say that every person that comes to us is a 570 is going to get a loan, right? Because it's the layering of risk. I mean, that's what you have to look at. And it's just like, it's like baking a cake, a layered cake, because as you said before, Marcia, there's several different things that can really deter, a loan where a person can't get a loan. It could be the property, it could be income, it could be credit, it could be several things. So yeah, we would really have to look at that, as a case by case scenario.
Yeah, that's great. So what do you think, Kathy, about foreclosures and evictions in Las Vegas? Are people talking about that? Are they worried?
Oh my goodness, we are very worried. So we are actively running it's called RAFT, Rental Assistance for Tenants.
Mhm.
We are actively paying both back rent and prospective rent. We are working with homeowners to pay back or delinquent mortgages. We are also doing some utility assistance payments. So we're actively engaged in those interventions. We're working with the other jurisdictions in Southern Nevada, so 4 cities and the county, to get a better handle on the tsunami that's about to hit us. So for example, we have a number of privately owned affordable housing developments that are going to meet or have met their affordability periods and compliance periods, and now they have the option to go market rate. So we are identifying who can we approach and say, look, we'll give you some rehab money. Maybe you just need $1 million to put some carpet in, paint the walls, keep it affordable. Because we can spend $1 million to keep 200 units where we can't build 200 units for that same amount of rehab money. And so we are looking at a number of those. At last count, there are about 1,700 of those units at risk, mostly with seniors. So the tenants are fixed income.
Mhm.
We have this odd dynamic because we're so close to the tech industry in California. We have a migration. It's a double-edged sword, right? So we're diversifying our economy in Southern Nevada, and we're inviting the tech entrepreneurs in. What happens is the tech entrepreneurs keep their tech job in Silicon Valley and work remotely. They live here. So they come in and see a $3,000 a month rent, and it's a bargain to them. Well, what's happening is a great deal of pressure on our rental market. So investors are putting pressure on the first-time homebuyer market. Remote workers are putting pressure on our rental markets. And there's a lot of incentives to kick your existing tenants out, throw some, new laminate flooring in, paint walls, and triple the rent. We're very worried about that. And the folks are now moving down in the market. I can't afford, 2 years ago, I could afford this kind of class A product. Well, I can't. I'm not going to be homeless because I'm employed and whatever. I'm going to move down into the next tier, which then pushes that tier into the third tier. Third tier renters are now homeless.
That's right.
So we're very concerned about both homeowners and renters being able to maintain suitable housing. Of course, we knew we would see people doubling and tripling up, and landlords saying, well, you got to go because you've got 7 people in this 1-bedroom apartment. But that's what families are having to do. And so we're very, very concerned, and we're taking a regional approach parallel, right? So we're spending some of our federal CARES Act and ARPA dollars to address the immediate concerns, and then working with the other municipalities and the county in this region and the state, I might add, to address what we see is going to be a much more protracted challenge for us.
Thanks. And Lisa, I know that you guys own 40 units of rental housing, and you've, as you described to me, that you're very mission driven about those units. You actually go out to find the most vulnerable people and recruit them into the property. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that and the fact that I think you had to go raise money to cover rent gaps during COVID.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. So similar to what Kathy talked about, ours isn't called RAP, but we have several acronyms out there for the various rental assistance and mortgage assistance programs out there. Because first of all, we are Christian-based, CDC. So regardless of whether there was a moratorium, we weren't going to be evicting people anyway because they couldn't pay rent, because we certainly understood what was happening with that pandemic. And that's because we know exactly, very intimately what our families are going through. So we actually have on staff a resident champion, and her role is to know the ins and outs of each of our residents, to know their stories. Not only how many kids do they have, but we know what their income levels are. We know what their job situations are. So we know sometimes before they know that they're getting ready to hit a crisis. We know that they've been unemployed. And so we are then about the business of assisting them. We're connecting them to resources if they need a different job or if they need to skill up in some of those programs. And we are actively seeking funds. Every time the city offers some rental assistance programs, we're sending text messages and emails, and we're calling our residents, hey, these opportunities are available. Do you need a ride? It's going to be at the post office, or it's going to be at the local library. Putting it again, meeting people where they are. We know which of our residents don't have transportation. We know which of our residents don't have computer access, because sometimes they'll say, oh, there's going to be a webinar. Well, if nobody has access to internet, what difference does it make if it's on webinar or not? You're not getting it to the people that it needs to reach. And so we have done things that we've applied for technology grants so that we can make sure that there is Wi-Fi in all of our units. We no longer believe it is a luxury to have Wi-Fi. It is a necessity. Just like if you live in St. Louis, air conditioning is a necessity. It is not a luxury. People die when they don't have access to air conditioning, in the city. And so we are being proactive in that we're making sure that we're taking care of our residents first, but then also connecting to the broader community and helping with those programs as well. And the point you made about us, being more intentional about the type of renters that we have, Kathy made a good point. As some of these, properties are starting to improve, so the people that have the money, they're rehabbing their properties. And so as they redo the rehab, what are they going to do next? They're going to increase rent. So now people are looking for places to go. And so we at Cornerstone have actually been getting phone calls because of people being displaced from what used to be affordable units, or no longer, because they have discovered, to Kathy's point, oh man, what a new set of hardwood floors would do, and some brand new paint and some new appliances. So now you can go from charging $450 a month rent, which is average what we pay at Cornerstone and in our neighborhood, where they can now get close to $1,000 or $1,500 because of these new amenities. Well, now these people need some place to go. And so it puts us in the position of trying to be there to be that catch-all, if you will, because that was our role anyway. But we only have 40 units. So eventually we're not going to have space to even help those individuals. So it's going to require having a larger conversation with the powers that be, with city officials, with organizations that are doing the rehab, properties, because we have to think about how to move people into different types of properties. So the people that are ready for home ownership, we need to get them there so that we can make room for the other people that we know are coming.
And you know what I really love about what Cornerstone is doing is that all of us, when we work in middle neighborhoods, are in this touchy place where we want to increase household wealth for our households that have not had household wealth, and we want to break that cycle of poverty. So improving values is good for people as long as they're in an ownership position. But how do you pursue that without abandoning your most vulnerable residents? And I feel like Cornerstone has really figured out a place where they're not going to leave the most vulnerable to fend for themselves. You've bitten the bullet, so to speak, and you've developed some of the most difficult housing in theory to manage, which is rental for those most vulnerable households.
It's
And
part of our mission.
yeah,
To move people. People come to us struggling. And so our goal is to get them stable, because we feel like housing is first. If you don't have to worry about where you're going to lay your head at night, you can maybe think about some other things. You can't tell a person, oh, do you have a budget and do you have a
yeah,
bank
yeah,
account? They trying to figure out, where am I going to sleep? So
yeah.
we have to get them to a place where they're stable. And then our ultimate goal is to put them in a position of of thriving. So we don't do, the traditional supportive housing, but we are very close. We are about providing economic mobility. And first, you got to understand your relationship with money and what's your household balance sheet. And one by one, we are moving people up the economic ladder.
Mhm. As Lisa was saying to us the other day, something to the effect of that when they talk to people who may become renters in their building, like if you want to just pay your rent and not talk to your landlord, then this is not the place for you. She said, we are up in your business.
That's right. Yeah, we have moved beyond the mere transaction of
Yeah.
paying rent. We are about relationships and partnerships. And so we are now signing compacts, and it's a part of our rental agreement that
Mhm.
in addition to you paying your rent by the first, with your grace period, you are also committing to you're going to have a bank account. You're going to have a savings account. You're going to commit to going through these financial stability classes with us on a regular basis. And so that's a part of what we do. And we do other fun things. We may send gift cards when a kid graduates from high school, or, we
Nice.
celebrate with our families because we know them. Christmas is coming. So we participate and make sure that all of our kids have toys for Christmas. So
Mhm.
we are very much in partnership, with our residents.
And I think knowing that you're taking care of that part of the community makes it less scary to improve housing values and opportunities to build wealth for other households in your communities. I hope.
Yes.
That's one of those age-old things. Okay, we've gone over. I kind of knew we would because these people are just too interesting. So definitely type your questions into the Q&A or the chat. I don't know, Paul, if you're still here, and you asked the question about addressing appraisal gaps with rehab. I wonder if you feel like you got that question answered. Maybe Greg, you could just touch on that again. So what are your plans for the ACK rehab situation?
Yeah, I think what's important about the appraisal gaps, I need to knock on wood. We have not had those type of gaps within our market, which has been great. And I think a big reason why is because it's the relationships that you have with your vendors. And so we're utilizing an appraisal management company that has been in this market for a number of years. I've worked with them over 20 years. And so the appraisers understand the communities that they're actually going into and appraising. And so we've actually seen, even with our Believe mortgage, our appraisals have been appraising over what the house is actually selling for. I mean, now we're not talking, tens of thousands of dollars, right? But $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, which is great. And so again, it's just understanding that relationship. So that would say to Paul, I mean, make sure you have the right relationships within the market that you're serving. And then with the ACK rehab, I mean, again, it's going to be making sure you have the right type of inspectors and construction managers that are going out to the site and understand the project. And so we have individuals on staff who do our inspections, who will do the construction managing when we do our home repair loans, for instance. So we're going to also piggyback that when we start doing the ACK rehabs for middle neighborhoods in 2022.
Are you having any labor problems, like finding contractors to do your work?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, with all across the board, Marcia. So whether it's our Lead Safe program, whether it's our home repair program, our contractors are easily 6 to 8 weeks out. And so what we've been able to do, we have probably about 40 different contractors that we utilize in Greater Cleveland. We have good relationships with several of them. But it's just tough because they have so much other work that they're doing, right? And And I had, during the summertime, we were working with a contractor who no longer is working with us, but we were able to give them $60,000 of work to contract to them, and they turned it down because they have so much work already in the pipeline. So yeah, it's like that here. It's like that nationally. So everyone's experiencing it right now.
Not to mention the cost of the materials they may be using, right?
Right. Yes.
This is being recorded and we will make it available to you. In fact, Anne, who is behind the scenes, does a follow-up email to everyone who registered for each of our webinars with the link to the recording, and you can always find them at our website, middleneighborhoods.org. Let's see if I missed anything else here. I see, I never, it's so funny to me. There's something about St. Louis. There are always people in the chat who are hooking up with Lisa. It's like, okay, just call me. Here's, she's, I swear she has a second full-time job in her board membership. People willing to sign her. What about, by the way, somebody said, Kathy was actually seconding something and saying development without displacement. I did want to mention that we haven't picked a date for sure yet, but probably late January, we're going to have a webinar with an expert on equitable development and with developers from each of 3 communities, where each community has taken sort of a different approach to dealing with. We're going to talk a lot about zoning, but some other products, some other issues as well. And so I think we're going to have 3 developers who are people of color who might not have been participating in development in these neighborhoods without some of the changes that happen. It's going to be really interesting. So keep an eye out for that. Any other, okay, Paul again asks, they have a different situation. Paul, what neighborhood are you in? Or what city are you in, excuse me? Neighborhoods where AC rehab might be 200, but the value is 80. So what would you say to that? That's interesting.
Yeah, I'd say
Yeah.
that you need a good partner with a lender. And so what we're going to do next year for our AC rehabs, the product that we're able to utilize will go up to $100,000 in repair. And that's sufficient within the Cleveland market. And so who we're working with, actually, they have different type of agreements throughout the country with different cities. And so, and LTVs, right, for combined loan to value. So I'd say, Paul, that, maybe work with like an M&T bank within the Baltimore area. Look at a lender that understands that market and might have some type of construction loan, if you will, that is specific to the Baltimore marketplace. Because again, unless you're talking to those partners locally who understand what's happening in those communities, I can't necessarily go to an M&T bank and say, hey, come to Cleveland, right, and understand what we're doing here. So we have a partner here locally that understands this community, understands the market, and they're going to be able to utilize that $100,000 rehab loan, right, which is sufficient for Cleveland. You're just going to have to find something in the sweet spot for Baltimore.
That's a really good response. I would also say, as far back as well, I guess I started working in this field in the 80s, but I'm sure that this was an issue in the 70s as well. There is a methodology to building your own comps in a neighborhood and being really targeted about clustering your rehab and knowing that you're going to lose money on the first few, but the more they're clustered together, the more you're likely to be able to build your appraisals and your comps so that as you continue going, that appraisal gap becomes less and less. So I think that still works. I haven't done it in a while. Okay, I don't see any other questions. I think we might have a couple of other, I see Dash also in our CDFIs. Yeah, we have a couple more slides. I always like to remind people to keep an eye out for one of our partner organizations, which is the Center for Community Progress. They have a terrific webinar series themselves called, not to be confused with Lisa's organization, but the Cornerstone webinar series. Lots of great topics. Please, if you have ideas for webinars that you'd like to see us do, for case studies for us to write up, if you have news stories that we can publicize in our newsletter, please send them to us. I think I'm pretty easily accessible through the website, but it's basically just marcia@middleneighborhoods.org. That's Marcia, M-A-R-C-I-A. And there will be an evaluation after this, which will have space for you to suggest webinar ideas. And for sure, join our community of practice. At the bottom of any one of our web pages, you can sign up to either just get our newsletter or to get our newsletter and be in the community of practice. And we'd love to have you join us. Thank you so much to each of our panelists. They're so smart, aren't they? And you know that we could have done a whole webinar, a whole day with each one of them. And I wish that we had that time. Someday we will. So thanks everybody, and have a great rest of December, and a great set of holidays. Appreciate it. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.